Welcome to WLNM, the web novel and manga review, hosted by Zeke Changuris.
Welcome to WLNM, the web, light novel, and manga review. We are dedicated to bringing our listeners the very special artists and writers that are part of this amazing explosion of creativity, giving us stories to entertain and inspire us. We'd like to welcome J.J. Piedra, the author of original English light novels, A.R. Dragonfly and Final Hope. Welcome, J.J., and let's just jump into the interview portion of this. So, how many books do you have out there for us to look at?
Right now, I have a total of 9 books that are published. 2 of them belong to Final Hope, which is a very short yet completed series, and I have 7 that are currently published in my A.R. Dragonfly series, with another one coming out around the week of May 4th, which will be Volume 8.
Okay. Now, I've been looking at A.R. Dragonfly, and I looked at Final Hope, and both seem to have a technology-ish. They're not what I would call true fantasy, like, knights and wizards and such. So, what kind of genre would you describe them as?
With Final Hope, it was kind of like my test to get into writing. I didn't really know if I wanted to actually publish books at that point, but I had this background where I just did like short stories and song lyrics and poetry, and I did character development for nearly 20 years. And I'm like, you know what, let me try my hand at writing a novel. So I basically looked at some of the things I was interested in, and one of my favorite animes at the time was one called Steins Gate, and it had this time travel, sci-fi vibe to it. So I kind of wanted to try my hand at one of those kinds of stories. So when I came up with Final Hope, I decided that I was going to stick with the time travel genre, sci-fi genre, but also mix in kind of like a slice of life aspect to it. And it was kind of like me testing the waters. So when it came to A.R. Dragonfly, I took a little bit of a different approach. And one of the things I loved in life was professional wrestling. And I did a lot of character creation in something called e-wrestling for a long time. And Amber Ryan, the main character of the book, was actually an e-wrestler of mine. And I took away the whole wrestling aspect. And then I was like, well, let's take her core personality, her core beliefs, how that she's a gamer and all that stuff, and let's see if I can incorporate this into a slice of life as well. And so it kind of isn't really technology, but it's more or less mixing video games, that she's a pro gamer, and how she deals with social anxiety and all these other things. So it's a completely different, genre switch from Final Hope, but it's one I was a little more comfortable at and I was able to flesh out better.
Okay. So when you're creating these books, how do you like to go about creating? Are you a discovery writer? When I was talking with Brandon Varnell last week, he was telling me that he never knows where the story is really going to go. He lets the characters lead him. Do you do that, or are you one of those, I'm going to plot out every arc in every chapter and then follow that plot?
It's kind of a little bit of both. With Final Hope, I had a beginning, major turning point, and an end already in mind. So I kind of just went ahead and started writing towards those points. And as I wrote, I discovered more and more things that I wanted to add. And then some, like the first volume I originally planned for 9 chapters, ended up being 12. The second I planned on having 10 chapters, ended up being 9. But I ended up nixing a chapter and replacing it with something completely different because I had this idea along the way. And as I did that, I kind of felt that discovery writing wasn't really for me because I'm constantly changing on the fly. And then, for me, I kind of have a little bit of OCD. So every time I write something, I want to go back and edit it and I want to change it. Like the first chapter of Final Hope took me almost 3 months to write because I would write it. I would go back and make all these changes, and then that would affect like what I want to do later. And it just got complicated. So I tried a little bit of both worlds with A.R. Dragonfly. I started off by plotting out every chapter. Well, first off, I should say I decided on a set number of chapters per volume, which was 7, which I thought was actually a pretty good healthy length for a light novel. Plus, it also paid homage to my favorite band, Tool, who writes mainly in the 7-time signature. So it's kind of like a little hidden reference there. But after I had the 7-chapter rule established, I went through and I looked at what I wanted to have happen in the story, and I would plan each volume out to kind of be like an anime season. So like the first volume would have like the beginning arc, and then the second volume would have like a tournament arc, and the third volume would have like a character development arc, and you would think more along the lines of each volume being like a 12-episode anime series. So it allowed me to pre-plan and get everything in order the way I wanted it to, but at the same time I realized that as I was going to write, there were going to be instances where I was going to possibly think of something that I wanted to include, which is the discovery writing part. So even though I had bullet points, I kind of left them a little bit on the loose side, so in case that did happen, I could fill it in and then find ways to tie it in without destroying the overall arc of the story. But I didn't have like an ending in mind with AR Dragonfly when I first started, like I did with Final Hope. I said I'm just going to keep writing and coming up with ideas, and as long as the story makes sense and doesn't get repetitive or stale, I'll keep doing it. And then when the time comes where I can't take this story any further, or I think it's just going to keep dragging on for length purposes, I'll put an end to it, which is what I did.
Okay, so well, I mean that is I guess a very familiar way of writing for any of us creators, and where it is a combination of both. Now, when you said you were doing character creation and stuff like that early on when you were starting as a writer, what was the motivating factor to create? Why did were you one of those people who always had stories in their head they wanted to share, or was it something like you were read something and it inspired you to then put your own stuff down on paper?
It was actually more or less I just always had stories. Even back, I would say even like in middle school, I would just write all these short stories. And I remember I lived in Massachusetts, now I live in Florida, but my grandparents moved here before I did. So I would come down to Florida to visit, and my grandfather had a computer back in the days when, an old like a Packard Bell computer if they were still around. It cost like $2,000 for it was like less than what we have on our smartphones like 10 years ago. It's crazy.
Yes.
But I would actually just use this word processor on there, and I would just type out these short stories when I wasn't doing anything on vacation here. And I still actually have those short stories somewhere in a binder. And that really kicked off my interest because I had all this creativity, I had an imagination, and I discovered I could just put it on paper. Then when high school came about, I had this advanced English class, which was kind of run a little bit differently. So every Friday we would have an open dictionary vocabulary test, which seems like a moot point, but the point of it was to get you to learn all these new words that were given to us. And the catch is during the week, up until Friday, you're supposed to write 5 essays containing the words that you learned on that quiz. So every week it would change. And of course, 5 was the bare minimum. And I had so many stories I wanted to get out in my head, and so many stories I created just from sitting there trying to use these vocabulary words, that I kind of ended up breaking the high school records for a number of essays written. I think previously it was like 30 essays. I finished the year with 63. So I crushed that record, and needless to say, I got 100 in that class. But that was kind of like the beginning, where I realized that I just had this ability to, I guess, visualize something in my head and put it to paper. And that's when I started getting more and more into writing and creativity and things of that nature. And that led to me doing, everyone goes through the whole poetry phase sometimes, and then there's the whole, creating characters and, writing song lyrics. Just basically just taking ideas and putting them onto paper, because you don't know what they're going to turn into one day. Like, I didn't think an e-wrestling character would actually turn into a full 12-volume novel series, but it happened. So it's always good to have a thought and then put it somewhere, because you don't know when it's going to come back and become something. And that's kind of how I started out and basically became an author today.
Yeah, and I don't know whether you would call it a poetry phase for me, I enjoyed writing poetry because I liked the structure. For me, poetry was as much as a puzzle as anything, because I would write in sonnet style, because I like trying to find the correct words to express the feeling within the certain rhyme scheme. I guess that is one of the reasons I enjoyed Twitter so much, because you have to convey a message in a certain amount of characters.
Yeah, definitely. When I actually, believe it or not, Twitter, when there were like 140 characters, it was challenging because you, as a writer, you have so much to say, and a lot of times I like to elaborate on things that I write. So when I was limited to 140 characters, it felt like a prison, and then they changed it to 280, and you're like, oh my god, it's a breath of fresh air. And believe it or not, just doubling it made a world of difference.
Well, my wife thinks in almost 140 characters, as far as you'll give her, say, can you say this in for Twitter, and she'll come up with something off the top of her head that fits in that old 140 character thing. Now, her job is digital media and social media, so she's always thinking that way, but I've always found it fascinating that you can give her a paragraph and she can distill it down to that tiny little tweet quickly. What is the favorite of the two universes or that you've created, or is there a universe that you created in your early days that you'd like to play with because it meant something to you?
I would probably say right now it's AR Dragonfly. I'm not trying to say like Final Hope wasn't special to me, but it was, because that was obviously my foray into writing light novels, and it was pretty much the launch pad that got me to say, yes, this is what I want to do. But it's like, even though I love Final Hope, I can see now that I've been doing AR Dragonfly all of the, I guess, mistakes that you do as, someone who's starting to become a writer. And it's like, well, I didn't stick to chapter lengths, I didn't flesh out this part of the story, I didn't develop this character the way it should, some of these characters seem a little bit more flat than I thought of originally. You see all these little mistakes, but still, people read it and told me they enjoyed it, so that to me, says a lot. But with AR Dragonfly, it's kind of like my second chance, where it's like, okay, now that I've learned how to do it with Final Hope, I can now start to do this a little more properly. And then it gave me more time to think about the characters, since I didn't have an ending in mind, how to develop them, how to tell their stories, how to build the world. And it became more of an emotional attachment to me through that series in Final Hope. So I guess a way you could look at it is that it was kind of like an experiment with Final Hope, and then AR Dragonfly was me kind of taking this seriously. And when you take something seriously, you obviously feel a little more attachment to it.
Okay. Yeah, now, what you were talking about, your English classes. Are you a good writer, as it would be graded due to grammatics and mechanics to begin with? Or are you, say, like me, who is not really good at grammatics and mechanics, but is creative with stuff coming out of their ears? I can tell you a story, but I used to write sentences that were a page long.
Oh yeah. If you want to see an example of that, I have a handwritten attempt at a novel that I did back in summer school, and that's a long story in and of itself, but I have 144 handwritten pages of something I wanted to turn into a novel, and it might as well just be one sentence. There's like no structure whatsoever to it, and I just kept writing and writing. But it's kind of weird, because it's kind of a mixture of both. I put basically the words onto the page, and I call that the first draft, and it's not going to make, some sense sometimes. Like, some of the character dialogue isn't the way I want it. Some of the way the words are written are not the way I want it. And when you go back and edit it, that's when I kind of take a look at proper grammar and things of that nature. Because even though I had all these English classes, the lessons stick with you. It's like, you remember stuff getting graded and you're like, oh, I missed a comma here, or this should not be a comma, this should be a semicolon, or you should not use this set of words, it's supposed to be, instead of with, it should be as, or, something like that. And those things like stick with you, but I don't worry about that on the first pass. I kind of worry about that as I go through the editing process. So it's kind of a mixture of both. It's like, yeah, I'll put anything down on the paper to where I want it, and then I'll go back, make the changes to the story the way I want it, and then I'll go back and do like grammar pass and make sure everything's as close to accurate as the English language is supposed to be. But then again, with like the main character Amber, she has like her own way of speaking, so at times I have to throw those rules out the window and make up these words that don't exist just to give her her own personality. So it's kind of funny that way.
Do you have your own set of eyes, your own spare set of eyes who looks at your stuff for free? I mean, my wife is my number one editor.
For me, it's just me.
That can be a challenge.
It is.
To edit your own material can be a challenge because you just don't see what you did wrong because it's right in your head.
Exactly. And I even had feedback where some of the writing isn't, as you said, not grammatically correct, but it's the way it makes sense to me in my head. I do try, to do a lot of the editing. Like, my process is I write the first draft, then I basically go on to the next book and write the first draft of that, because if you write something and then reread it, it's kind of like oversaturating the same stuff in your head. So I like to take a little bit of break and do the next book. Then once that's in first draft, I go back to the previous volume and then read it with a fresh set of eyes, like I'm looking at it for the first time, because enough time has passed to where it's out of your head and you start remembering what you've written. Then once that's done, I run it through a spell check, then I run it through Grammarly to basically get all that taken care of. Then I set it aside for a while, let it get out of my head for a bit, maybe go edit the second volume, then come back to the first and reread it a second time, or I should probably say a third time, because I have this habit of rereading it as I'm typing. So if you want to get technical, it is a third time. And then I finally read it slowly. Like, it'll take me a week to read, an entire book versus, the 3 to 4 hours or maybe 5 hours that it takes to normally read it. And I scrutinize and I look at everything and I make sure everything is in order. So it's not like I just write it, read it, and pass it along and say, okay, done, next. I kind of have a little bit of a system where I'm just jumping back and forth between volumes, so that way I always have a fresh, set of eyes, quote unquote, when I look at it, and then do my best to edit it on my own.
Okay, talking about the writing, so what's your favorite type of scene to write? Are you big on battles? Are you big on dialogue? Or do you like love scenes? What is your favorite type of scene to write?
For me, it's basically dialogue. I know with light novels and how they differ from like a regular American novel is they are at times more dialogue heavy than they are with narrative. And I think that gives the characters more personality that way. You get to really dive into what they're like through what they say, through their actions. So whenever I get to a speaking part, it's always my favorite thing to write, because I'm always giving the personality back to the characters. I'm developing them and basically having a platform to present that to the audience, and hopefully they connect with what I'm writing in that way. So me, the narrative and the scenes are important, but I feel the dialogue and the characters drive a story just as much as the actual base story itself. So those are always the fun things to write, because you always have different personalities. You can do different types of scenarios with them. You can have a lot of fun and a lot of openness and creativity with the way their personalities are. And it also sets limits too, because if you have someone that's snarky, they're not going to be genuinely nice all the time. If you have someone who is nice, they're not going to lash out at someone. So you kind of have to find that balance of where they are. And that's actually a really fun part, is to try and stay within the guidelines that you set, but also make it entertaining and relatable as possible too. So battle scenes are nice. I have them in Air Dragonfly because I like to depict the video game that Amber plays, which is called Blazors. So I like to write out matches for that, which stems from me being a match writer in e-wrestling, I would write out professional wrestling matches all the time. So I kind of got the sense of, the flow of battle. But sometimes it's a little bit tedious because you got to think, far ahead. It's like, how does the battle play out? Like, what happens? What kind of action sequence can I do? There's a lot of planning, and it's not just like writing it straight through. What dialogue, though, it's almost like discovery writing, because you can start talking, and all of a sudden it's like you're having a conversation with the character in your head, and you just start writing out what they're saying as it's happening in your mind. Whereas battle scenes are a little bit different, so it's a little bit easier to write dialogue. So I think that kind of leans towards like my favorite scenes to write.
What authors do you admire? Like one from the past and one from the present. Like for me, if I would say writers I admire, I love F. Scott Fitzgerald, but my favorite writer of the modern era is actually I love Aaron Sorkin. I love his dialogue. He makes, I watch a scene and I'm like, that's an Aaron Sorkin written scene, because the dialogue is punchy, it's fast, and it's smart. How about you?
Actually, kind of an odd answer here, but I actually don't really have a favorite writer, because I barely actually read. If it actually makes any sense whatsoever. And I know it's just like, how can you be a writer if you don't read anything? It's weird, because the thought of writing is more compelling to me than the thought of reading. I mean, obviously, I will go back and read my own work in order to, edit it. But when it comes to sitting down with an actual book, it's kind of weird, because I'm always doing things. If I'm not, writing, I'm doing stuff with the website I work for, the Outer Haven. If I'm not doing that, I'm working my 8 to 5 job Monday through Friday. If I'm not doing that, I'm trying to get caught up watching anime. I'm trying to get caught up on the games I'm behind on. I'm reading mangas and stuff for review, because they are shorter than novels. So it's like, if I'm sitting down with a book, I know it's going to take several hours or a couple days to get through, and all the while I'm doing that, I have this like nagging feeling that I should be doing something else. I know it's like a relaxation thing, it's a leisure thing to read something, but I'm always the type of person who likes to be productive, and if I'm doing something that's relaxing, it makes me feel like I'm not being productive and I have to go do something else. It's like the same way like watching an anime. Like, I used to be able to binge a whole anime series in like one sitting, and now I'll get like 2 episodes in and I'm like, I gotta stop this and go do something, and it's the same thing with like a video game. Like, I could do like an all-night gaming session before. Now I play for like an hour or maybe an hour and a half, and it's to the point where like I need to stop, I have to go do something else. And it's because I've taken on so much in my day-to-day life, to the point where I'm so constantly like doing things that I'm so used to just working on something. So the concept of taking the time to leisurely sit down and do something is almost a foreign concept to me now, which is kind of a weird thing to say, but I know some other people who actually feel that way too. And it's like you're always having that need to be productive, almost like it's trying to produce that dopamine drip for you, to get you through, that day, and to make you feel excited and good about what you're doing, to make you feel productive. And so I barely read. I mean, I have read some other original English light novels before. I've read Journey of a Betrayed Hero from Brandon Varnell, who you interviewed on the last show. I've read I can't think of the name of it now. But it's from Pedro Rodriguez. I've read Koji Kondo's book. I've read stuff from Sora Anna, from Vic's Lab. So I've read some other novels, but it's like few and far between when I do, and it's not like a slight to anyone that I didn't read their work. It's the fact that it's finding the time to do it and convincing myself it's okay to actually sit there for that length of time and actually read it.
Yeah, well, I can understand that. I grew up in a family where you never uttered the reference, I'm bored. Because if you said I'm bored, sure as heck my parents would find something for you to do. You mentioned anime a couple of times, so what would you say is possibly your favorite series?
Definitely Steins Gate, without question. I'm not really big on science fiction in the broad scope of things, but I do love two aspects of science fiction, one of which is time travel. The other one is artificial intelligence, which is why I combined both of those genres into Final Hope. And Steins Gate, to me, kind of takes the whole notion of time travel and does like the best job explaining it that I've seen so far. I mean, you've got your Doctor Who stuff, you got your Back to the Future stuff, you have all that stuff for, that genre, but Steins Gate really goes into how you're not really traveling through time per se, but you're actually moving between world lines where the changes you make are reflected in that different world line. And it was a really interesting concept, and of course the characters and the story were just so amazing to see unfold that it just really captivated me. It's one of the very few shows that I gave a perfect rating to, even though there were, some flaws people would argue, but it's about as close to a perfect anime for me than anything I've seen. But outside of that, I do love some of the classics like Neon Genesis Evangelion, which I thought was an absolutely amazing show. Your Cowboy Bebop, your Full Metal Alchemist, things like that were absolutely outstanding. But there's like a million series that I really enjoyed, but Steins Gate was always one that stuck out the most.
Well, I can agree with you. Steins Gate is stupendous, as is Cowboy Bebop, but I get crap all the time because I am just not an Evangelion fan. The series to me just doesn't seem it. They say it's a mecha series, but it's not a mecha series. Those are technically zombies that have armor plated on them. It just doesn't work for me at all.
That's fine. I mean, one of my mantras with anime is like, watch what you want to watch, like what you want to like. If someone else doesn't agree with it, oh well, that's their opinion.
Yeah,
you like what you like, and that's all there is to it.
I repeat this again and again, especially to the Twitter universe. I've never seen a bad anime. I've only seen ones that just don't appeal to me. Every story has validity. And that every story that gets made is somebody's passion. And it's not my right to say that it sucks. It's my right to say that it just didn't work for me. Thinking about that, thinking about what we might recommend to other people, tell me a little bit about the database that you're constructing.
So one of the things that I tried to do with AR Dragonfly was I decided to try and get it out there by crafting press releases and sending them out to some of the major news sites like Anime News Network, Crunchyroll, things like that. And obviously, with me not being a well-known author or AR Dragonfly being a series that's famous or popular, the chances of me getting my press releases picked up were next to zero, and of course none of that happened. So it's kind of frustrating when you have to do all your self-marketing to try and get your name out there, and the door just keeps getting closed at every chance that you have to open one. So I decided to ask Keith Mitchell, who is the editor-in-chief for the Outer Haven, the site that I work for, if it was okay if I could turn the Outer Haven into kind of like the safe haven for original English light novelists. So they would have a place that would actually not reject a press release, or they would have a place to hype up their stories or upcoming books, and just treat it as the site that would actually post news for them on their behalf. And we worked it out, and we also came up with the idea of the original English light novel database, where it would go beyond just posting news stories for them. It would also list them on the site in their own dedicated section, where it'd have a biography for them. It would have links to their books, links to their social media, pictures of their book covers, things of all that. So if anyone went to the site, they could click on the database and then discover all these authors. And of course, our database is not the first one to do it. Justice Stone, who is a prevalent YouTuber who reviews light novels, has his own website as well called OriginalEnglishLightNovels.com, and he has a database set up as well. So I'm not the first to do it, but I am the first website to actually offer the ability for people to post actual news stories and press releases too. So that played a big part in it, and I decided if we're going to do this, I don't want to charge for it, because for all, independent artists, we spend all of our money on publishing the books. We spend money on commissions for the character art. Sometimes we spend money on editors or, things like that. So we're always working on tight budgets, and we're relying on our 8-to-5 jobs or whatever type of jobs we have to pay for all that along with all of our bills. So I wanted to do this to where anyone could do it for free. All they have to do is basically submit to me their news story, their cover for their books, a 16:9 image, so I can put it up on, the front page, so it would have an image to go with the story. And that's pretty much it. I would post it for them. It takes, less than 5 minutes of my time to post a story. Then it gets viewed by our audience, which is roughly between 150 to 200,000 people a month. And, like I said, I can't promise fame or riches. I can't promise sales. What I can promise is that people will have a platform they can turn to, promote their light novels without any money investment whatsoever. And the database is just an optional thing. If they want to add their name to it, they can go to the outerhaven.net. There's a form on there. They could fill it out, and I will personally add them to the database, and it will live there until either the site shuts down, which will probably never happen, or they come to me and say, I don't want to be on the database anymore. So it's basically just that free platform that people can use to promote their light novels and get their voices out there. And honestly, it's something that our community needs, because there's a lot of stigma out there about original English light novels, that they're not legitimate light novels. They don't come from Japan, so therefore they're not true material worth reading. And these people are amateur people that don't know how to write a book. But if you actually read some of the light novels in Japan, not all of them, but they're not exactly the most well-written books either. So, it's a big stigma that we're trying to overcome. And with the OELN community just being so niche and so new, that someone out there just has to, give them the chance, and that's what I'm trying to do with the database.
All right. So when's your next volume of Dragonfly coming out?
Right now, Volume 8 is, it's slated for quote-unquote May 4th, but it's technically, the paperback is out now. If you want to, dig deep and, search for it, you can find it on Amazon for $9.99. But the actual release date is May 4th, and the reason why it's up there now is because one of the things I like to do with each volume is do physical autographed copies. I know a lot of my close friends loved autographed copies, and by doing that, I've gotten some people within the community who have started to get autographed copies. So I wanted to make sure that the book was available for me to order my author copies of on May 4th. So I didn't want to submit it on the day it released and then go through the 72-hour process that Amazon usually takes to approve it. And then May 10th or May 11th, whenever, it finally goes through approval, I order it, and then 2 weeks later I get it, and then now it's June by the time these people are getting their copies that they pre-ordered. So I wanted to make sure the book was live, and unfortunately that's the only way you can order author copies, is if the book is live. So that's why I pushed it out a little bit ahead of time. But it is there now if you really, really want to get it. But if you want to get the digital version of it as well, the Kindle version, that will be out on May 4th, because that usually takes 24 hours to approve. So I'll do that over the prior weekend. But yeah, that's the week I'm aiming for the official launch, and that's the day I'll also be ordering the author copies for people who want to have a signed version, which they should get by the end of the month.
All right. JJ, thank you for joining me. I can't tell you, because you already know how exciting it is to live in this age where creators have platforms that they can share their works with. I personally think every creator deserves a chance to be heard, and that seems to be along what you're doing with the database. I hope any of our listeners take time to subscribe to this fledgling channel, WLNM, where we hope to continue to highlight the best the independent creators have to offer. Thank you for listening. You can contact JJ on Twitter at JJ Piedra, OELN, through his website at joshuajpiedra.com, or look up the original EnglishLightNovels.com for his database. If you like what you heard today, please subscribe so we can continue to bring you the best these new creators have to offer. And to you listeners, thank you for your time, and keep reading.
This has been a WLNM podcast.